Just 30 years ago, scientists thought that some places on Earth were sterile. Life there was thought to be simply impossible, just as it seemed to be absent from other planets.
The acid waters, they're very corrosive, yeah.
It has considerable acidity, almost the same pH levels as found in sulfuric acid.
It's got soil and salt and toxic elements like arsenic, cadmium, and nickel.
However, some creatures, known as extremophiles, manage to develop in environments which are extremely hostile for most living creatures. In these environments, microorganisms are the kings. To be able to feed themselves, some animals have strange adaptations. Scientists are studying how they manage to live in water which is as acid as vinegar or as alkaline as washing liquid. In the four corners of the planet, in Europe, America, Oceania, and in Africa, we're going to discover these true hells. This pink lake is Lake Retba in Senegal. Its salt concentration is 10 times greater than that of seawater. Here, with 350 grams of salt per litre, the world record is attained.
Ah ça y est, où ça monte?
Okay, it's going up strongly. 310, 320, there 350, it really is a hell. With that kind of salinity, there are no more fish, no more crustaceans, no more plankton. There's nothing anymore, just a bacterial soup. Let's go.
However, in this environment at the limits of life, microorganisms develop massively. They are the only living beings in this salty hell. These microorganisms have a pink pigment. They're so concentrated that they give the lake its pink color. They use this pink pigment to produce energy. It also allows them to resist very high doses of ultraviolet radiation in the same way that the pigmentation of our skin protects us from the sun's rays.
Here, for once, the bacteria are visible to the naked eye, and we can see three sorts of pigments: green, orange, and black.
Depending on the effect of light on the pigment of the bacteria, the color of the lake varies, changing from pink to purple, sometimes without any color at all. The salt density is such that children have fun floating on the water.
Come out now. It's really been too long. It's too salty. Come on. Go on, hurry up. Rinse yourselves.
To resist the sun and parching caused by the salt, the Senegalese collectors rub shea butter into their skin. The men use a stake to break up the salt deposits on the bottom. The women pour out on the ground their basin of 30 kilos of salt. It will whiten in the sun. My father started work here 15 or 16 years ago. He worked in the lake. He can't work more than 1 or 2 days a week because it's not good to work anymore.
Okay.
It's not good.
All that are the injuries caused by the salt.
That's all caused by the salt, yes.
And because of that, he can't work anymore.
Despite the fatty protection of shea butter, many salt collectors are the victims of severe skin diseases. The salt from the Pink Lake is harvested to preserve fish caught at sea. It destroys the microorganisms responsible for decay. So how do our extremophile bacteria survive?
In a salty environment, water drains from the cell and the cell flattens like a pancake. To keep their cellular form and therefore to keep themselves alive, the bacteria of the Pink Lake adopt a strategy which is to fight bad with bad. That's to say, they keep up the same concentration of salt on the inside as that on the outside, except that their salt is less toxic than the salt which is found in the Pink Lake.
The bacteria of the Pink Lake have a second secret. They are also adapted to the pressure of the salt thanks to their very original geometric shapes. They are square-shaped, sometimes triangular in shape. This is exceptional because in nature no other species has this kind of shape. Like all living creatures, the bacteria attract parasites, innumerable viruses. Because of that, the lake has one of the strongest concentrations of viruses in the world.
We filter to harvest the microorganisms. We have to quantify them with a microscope. In a simple 1-litre bottle, for example, we can quantify more than 1 billion bacteria. And what's even more impressive is that we found recently that there are 10 times as many viruses.
These viruses have an extraordinary diversity of shapes. Some are round, others are lemon-shaped or like string beans. If there are so many viruses in the Pink Lake, it's because they use bacteria so they can multiply.
The viruses need to use the genetic material of the bacteria to reproduce. In fact, the viruses penetrate the interior of the bacteria by the membrane, and some viruses even have crab-like claws to cling.
With this strong concentration of salt and viruses in the Pink Lake, birds and fishermen aren't likely to be able to catch fish. However, just beside the Pink Lake is found the Saloum River, where salt is extracted too. Despite the lack of oxygen and the high salinity, fish have managed to adapt here.
There aren't any big ones here anyway, not very big ones.
Here, the tilapia's fish are 4 times smaller than they are elsewhere. Here, the salt concentration is 4 times greater than seawater.
This dwarfism is the consequence of the strategies put in place by the tilapia in order to survive in extreme conditions. Salt regulation and reproduction are the priorities because they are vital for the species.
These pockets are the egg sacs of the tilapia. Contrary to the immense majority of fish who release their eggs without a care, the tilapia only produce a few eggs, which are guarded preciously in the mouth of the father. To regulate the salt, the tilapia has cells which act like pumps and which allow them to excrete the excedent. As it goes down towards the sea, the salinity of the Saloum River drops and mud is always everywhere at low tide. However, in this inhospitable environment, a strange fish has adapted to survive.
There, there's one of them. It's coming out of the water. It's really an extraordinary fish that is able to spend most of its time out of the water finding its food, insects, and therefore to avoid fighting for food too much with other species.
Its two chest fins are joined together and act like legs to move forwards or backwards.
Like all fish, the periophthalm has gills. The problem is that the gills aren't efficient for air breathing, so it has developed two types of complementary respiration. The first consists of storing up in its gill chambers, which are highly vascularized, allowing gas exchange that's very efficient. As well, it can breathe through its skin, which is also highly vascular.
So the walking fish will often stay for hours with its mouth open before leaving in search of food in the salty, muddy water. Even if birds rarely land in the Senegal salt marshes, especially at the Pink Lake, there are salty environments which do attract them. Thousands of pink flamingos stop over in the salt marshes of the Camargue. The salinity of the environment is 3 to 8 times greater than seawater. To feed, the little Artemia prawns swallow extremophile algae and are eaten in turn by the pink flamingos. The flamingos filter the water with their beak, which is armed with a kind of comb, and evacuate the salt through their nostrils. The Artemias have a strategy for survival in the saltiest and pinkest of the marshes. The water penetrates the interior of their tissue. The salt, swallowed through their mouths, is then evacuated from their organism, but that isn't all.
The Artemia has superpowers rarely found together in a single organism. In order to reproduce, if there isn't enough oxygen or if the salinity is too high or too low, it lays more resistant eggs covered with a special layer. This layer can resist temperatures between minus 150 and plus 100 degrees.
Floating on the surface of the water, the eggs can survive thus for many years before hatching.
The red colour of the Artemia is due to their diet of the red Dunaliella and to microorganisms. This algae produces natural carotenoids to protect itself against salinity and the sun. This is the reason why pink flamingos are pink, because they're at the end of this food chain.
But why do the pink flamingos choose salty lakes as stopovers and as reproduction sites, when they seem to us so inhospitable? Situated in the north of Tanzania, Lake Natron is a saline and alkaline lake. It welcomes half of the world population of pink flamingos. The largest gatherings happen when the lake waters are at their lowest, letting immense crusts of salt appear. However, in this ultra-salty hell, no fish, no Artemia, just the bacteria known as halobacteria manage to survive.
They're the perfect organism for survival if you're happy to live in a salinity of thousands of microsiemens and at a temperature of 50 degrees. But nothing else can live there, not even the tiniest animal can eat those bacteria. It's too extreme.
This lake offers a natural protection for the flamingos against their predators, who can't reach the flamingos because of the broth of salt. The soles of the flamingo's feet is hyper-resistant to the salinity, and the constant temperature of 40 degrees at the surface of the lake doesn't seem to bother them.
It looks very, very uninviting, but this is flamingo dinner. And in fact, it's flamingo dinner, lunch, breakfast, day after day after day. They're very happy eating this because it's highly nutritious. So the high sunlight, the high temperature, the algal productivity can be really, really high. And thus this food can be made day after day after day.
Because of the absence of artemia, the flamingos of Lake Natron have become in fact vegetarians. Here, algae is abundant. Actually, they have at their disposal a large amount of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll pigments allow them to absorb the light, and that energy is then transformed into food.
The chlorophyll is 3, 4, 5 times higher than any other lake. Moreover, because we're close to the equator, it's growing every single day of the year, whereas if you go to the temperate zone, then it only grows in the summer and not in the winter. So the productivity is enormous, and the consistency of that productivity is also enormous. So that's why you can support a high amount of animal life. It's probably the highest amount of productivity of any lake in the world.
Certainly, there's a lot of algae, but their calorific value is low. Because of this, the pink flamingos have to filter 15 times their weight in water each day to get enough food. In the dry season, the area around the lake is a desolate site. In these moon-like, arid, dusty, greyish landscapes, death is often encountered because of water. The death-bringing salinity of the lake has to be left behind to discover more evolved aquatic life. On the other side of the immense salty crust wind several rivers springing from warm water springs that feed the lake. It's alkaline water, which has a pH of 10, whereas drinking water has a pH of 7. But here, the salinity is less, and that's the reason why a curious fish has developed here. Professor Mavuti is looking for alcalicus, a fish which can stand the salty hell and also the boiling water.
So your mind should be how to get the net down enough to be able to trap that fish. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Right? Go like obliquely. Right? Move the other way, move. Quick, 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 quick. There. Up. Beautiful. That's nice.
Yeah.
You get the fish in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just drop them into the bucket. Okay.
If you take here free fish from other river, they will be died immediately because they are not adapted. They are not adapted to survive in this chemical and physical condition. It's so extreme that you have to live here for thousands of years to adapt. They adapted their genetic, let's say, software to improve their metabolism to cope with this kind of environment. You have to be adapted. You have to have a long history behind you that make your DNA good for this kind of environment.
Professor Crozer and his assistant are going to test several points to try and establish the survival limits of extremophile fish.
These fish are surviving at the edge of what can be said a safe environment. A little change here in chemistry can make all the life disappearing.
In fact, it's a very fragile ecosystem which can easily be menaced by rapid changes in the external environment. If, for several days, a warm wind blows and temperatures don't drop during the night, then this fragile shelter for life is endangered. Green algae are the basis of the alcalicus fish's nutrition, so the search for new feeding grounds takes up the greater part of their time. This species was perhaps not quite the same millions of years ago.
They didn't arrive here, they evolved here. And probably that started a time when the environment of Africa was very much wetter, the lakes were bigger. As the climate got drier, they were isolated, and that's the key to evolution. Isolation makes species different.
The rainy season has finally arrived. Lake Natron's colour goes from red to green. The water volume is increasing, and the salts are diluting. In the rivers, the hunting ground of the alkaline fish provisionally gets bigger. The respite will only last a few weeks. Best make the most of it. But the cormorants as well, they're part of this too. The surviving fish now have to reproduce as quickly as possible before the dry season returns. In such an environment, eating and reproducing aren't restful activities.
It's almost 50
degrees centigrade.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
And at this temperature, of course, you don't have any oxygen.
Zero oxygen.
But the alkaline fish have found the answer by capturing the oxygen at the surface of the water. Professors Harper and Crozer are trying to establish their survival limits.
They're responding only to a change in oxygen and temperature. The salinity is staying the same all the way downstream.
The fish take considerable risks to find the best algae. Sometimes it's a losing bet.
They've passed the temperature tolerance limit up to 48 degrees centigrade, but in those conditions, the algal growth is better. So they're darting up, trying to get food and going back, and these two have failed in the gamble. So this species has got a temperature tolerance that is between 48 degrees and about 45 degrees. Now that's far greater, that's centigrade, far greater than a human being could tolerate in the bath. Most fish are in the temperature they can tolerate, so the algae is getting grazed. Those that are capable of withstanding a higher temperature, darting in, eating, darting back, will get better food. So they're the ones that are taking the risk, and the reward is the food, the risk is getting cooked.
I'm sure that the DNA analysis will solve some scientific problem. Who knows? Maybe from knowing how the life can survive, this at the end can be of help for us, because we have to survive as well.
In spite of its inhospitable nature, Lake Natron is an important stopover for many migratory birds. Let's leave the Atlantic for the Pacific. In California, another ultra-saline lake, scarcely more welcoming, is however another well-loved bird stopover. Thousands of migratory birds come here to double or triple their weight before taking on their long voyage towards South America. However, we're not below the equator, and extremophile algae are therefore clearly less prolific. So how do we explain such a strong attraction?
Many of the bird species here have found the alkali fly to be a rich source of protein. The local Native Americans also found the alkali fly to be a rich source of protein and would harvest the fly from the nearshore regions. And they were known as the Kutsadika, the fly-eating people.
The shores of Mono Lake house the largest concentration of alkali diptera in the world. To evolve in the salty hell, alkali diptera grew itself its own diving suit. These slender flies have long hairs. They have them everywhere, even on their heads. These hairs trap the air around them, thus creating a protective air bubble. This ingenious system allows them to reach the carpet of bacteria upon which they feed.
If you drink this water, you'll see it has a bitter, soapy taste due to the sodium bicarbonate and sodium carbonate in the water.
Over centuries, the accumulation of carbonates and calcium has formed enormous tapers. And it's from these carbonates that the extremophile bacteria have massively developed.
And just that little bit I drank, probably about 1 million bacteria I ingested in that couple drops of water.
Thanks to this overabundance of bacteria, and therefore of food, Mono Lake holds another record, that of the number of artemias.
Its population in the middle of the summer can range between 3 and 12 million shrimp in the whole lake. This summer population produces resting eggs that fall to the bottom of the lake and rest over the winter. So the next spring, when the waters warm up, these eggs hatch out and the cycle starts over. Sometimes in the summer, you can see just how abundant the artemia are when the current conditions cause one water mass to go underneath another, and the artemia will collect in these long windrows.
From this, seagulls and other migratory birds can choose between flies and the artemias.
The grebes, though, eat almost only the shrimp. And they capture these shrimp when they swim through the water, and they have special glands that deal with that salt load that they get from eating the shrimp out of this salty water. The gulls, on the other hand, get a lot of salt load in that food, but they then go to the freshwater streams that come in at the west end of a lake and drink a lot of water to help deal with that salt load.
A few wing strokes from Mono Lake, there was once another bird paradise. Here is what is left nowadays of Owens Lake. A century ago, the water from this lake allowed the inhabitants of Los Angeles to water their lawns.
Owens Lake, before the water was diverted from Owens Lake, it looked very much like Mono Lake. It was a salt lake like Mono Lake. There were millions of birds here. It was a very productive place. But then when the water was taken away, Owens Lake has become one of the most alkaline places on Earth. If there was ever an alkaline hell, this could be it.
Even the alkaline flies have fled. The salinity of Owens Lake has become 4 times greater than that of Mono Lake, and the ground temperature can get above 66 degrees. Only bacteria survive in salt crystals.
The red color in the water is caused by 2 very salt-tolerant bacteria, Halobacter and Halocochi. They're very small. They live in the hot waters here, the hot temperatures and the very salty conditions. They're so small that about 500,000 will fit on the head of this pin here.
This lake has turned into a toxic desert, disturbed by tornadoes. Its dust burns skin and eyes and gets in everywhere.
Over 200 locations across the lake bed where we have monitoring stations that measure what's happening out here. We measure wind direction, wind speed, temperature, and really most importantly, the sand motion. If you've seen footage of the Twin Towers when they collapsed on 9/11, the amount of dust that came off of those, the levels that we have here on Owens Lake are comparable to the amount of dust that was generated during when the Twin Towers fell.
Pushed by the wind, dust clouds can menace places sited within a radius of 100 kilometers.
So these are very, very fine soil particles, and they lodge very deeply into your lungs, and that can cause health problems. In addition, there are toxic materials out here, arsenic, cadmium, and nickel, which can also cause health effects.
Is Owens a unique case? Do other places exist that have been really turned into hell through man's actions? Take a look at this Spanish river. As the name says, Rio Tinto has a reddish glint. Is that really its natural color?
Rio Tinto is unique. It's 100 kilometers of river with its pH around 2. That means as acid as lemon juice or as acid as sulfuric acid. It's practically the most sulfurous river in the world.
It's also one of the most polluted. Rio Tinto carries 2 tons of zinc, 1 ton of copper, 100 kilograms of arsenic and 10 kilograms of cadmium every day to the ocean.
Here we can see this intense red color, which is due to the heavy concentration of iron.
In fact, the source of the river is in Andalusia, where is found one of the biggest open-cast copper mines in Europe. For a long time, it was thought that the determined exploitation by mankind for over 3,000 years was the reason for its acidity. But scientists have shown that this acidity is of natural origins.
Before coming to the conclusion that the acidity of the river was natural, some of the region's heads thought the opposite. They wanted to fix it. But whatever they did, by adding chemical products, nothing seemed to work. The pH stayed highly acidic. If we take a sample of water and we pour this reactive substance with a neutral pH, the solution immediately turns red because of the acidity in the river.
If mining activity isn't in question, then what is responsible for such acidity? In order to know this, it's necessary to go back to the source of the river, there where the pH is 1.7. This means very high acidity.
The most important actors in the acidity of the river are 2 bacteria, Aciditas bacillus and Loctus spiritus. They produce sulfur, which has a high pH, and which gives the river its high acidity. The red color comes from the dissolved ferrous sulfate in the water.
Because of its high acidity, the river is dangerous for most living things. An old story recounts how a certain Diego Delgado once threw a living frog into the river. That frog died before it could even get back to the bank. The acidity of the river is so high that even big mammals still use it to destroy their parasites. Trying to cross it could prove fatal for this less than prudent ant. However, in this chemical hell, life manages to trace its path. Thanks to the energy brought, amongst others, by the sun, which they transform in energy, microalgae grow.
They're taking their energy from the light of the sun. A very intense green color which comes from the action of solar energy on chlorophyll. The little bubble that we can see there are the oxygen produced by the algae.
If the algae manage to produce oxygen by staying at the surface of the water, what do they do to combat its acidity? Because of these walls which partition the algae cells, acidity doesn't get higher in their center than a pH of 5 to 6, even if the river water has in places a pH of 1, that is to say the same acidity as a human stomach. In order to survive, all these tiny organisms keep their pH close to neutral by evacuating to the exterior all those dangerous chemical elements. These diatoms have a shell, a real bone structure which protects their motor, these little green elements full of chlorophyll. Like the algae, diatoms transform solar energy into fuel.
The number of species found in the river is of the order of 1,300, including all the types of fungi.
The further one goes down the river, the more the algae and the fungi are found. But the sulfuric oxide deposits bear witness to the toxicity of the environment. A unique ecosystem has little by little established itself after the bacteria. At its peak, here's Heliozoa, a sort of amoeba. This predator moves around by long, sticky filaments, which give it a sun-like appearance. Its rays are deadly. This eucliniid is, unfortunately, about to learn that to its cost. The euclinids are very common in extremely acidic environments. They feed on bacteria. These two red pigments, which look like eyes, serve them to detect the sun. They also stimulate their flagellum in order to direct themselves to better light conditions. At the surface limit, the algae, which are more and more numerous, are populated by the halobates, also known as water spiders or walkers. They seem to slide over the water's surface. Their feet are covered with hairs covered with an oily secretion upon which water slides. It is by using this rostrum that it catches microorganisms or dead insects that have been trapped by the acidity. Through all these species, Rio Tinto is nowadays a protected acidic biotope. You have to go to New Zealand to find the most extreme acidic environments.
Frying Pan Lake is the hottest, most acidic, large body of water in the world. The average temperature in this lake is 55 degrees centigrade, but there are many hot spots and many acidic vents.
Dr. Hugh Morgan is an acidophilic bacteria hunter. He often goes to Waimangu to study the ecosystems.
Temperature is 69 degrees.
69?
Yeah, it's quite high.
Good for thermos.
Here, only bacterial life is possible.
That's 2.5 to 3 pH.
When the temperature drops below 67 degrees, the algae can grow, and then an ecosystem becomes possible.
The temperature on the surface of this algal film is 45 degrees. It is teeming with life, lots of flies and larvae.
These larvae merge together in a ball, seeming to pass successively upside down and vice versa, in order to expose themselves as little as possible to the deadly acidity. They are also the result of strange adaptations. They have a gland that acts like a kidney by filtering acidic elements. These super larvae also have 2 telescopic respiratory tubes, according to their need of air. But the most spectacular of their adaptations are their little feet with claws that are usually never found on fly larvae. They allow them to hang on to algae so that the currents won't pull them into zones with a deadly pH.
We need to make sure this is really tight. Don't want it to come off. And we'll just adjust the lens. Okay.
Some acid lakes also are connected to each other by rivers. There the temperature is less, but this poses a big risk for the larvae which can't hang on.
Doesn't look as bright as it did.
Oh, it looks like it's being corroded.
Yes, the acid waters, they're very corrosive. Yeah.
Feel a low pH.
It doesn't take long.
The surviving larvae have also to face the beak of the fantail, a bird that is a specialist in hunting them on the surface. Despite all their efforts, many larvae don't become mature because of the rapid changes in pH due to the acid sources feeding the lakes. Larvae that manage to transform into flies have to be imaginative to find those calories. Some of them use the mixture of larvae so as to recover the precious bacteria. Others take advantage of the humidity of rare plants and fungi which grow here to feed off that.
This plant is at the extreme edge of its range. Its roots are at 46 degrees and it's very acid pH. Nothing else can grow here.
Like fly larvae, plant roots establish themselves at the surface so they can oxygenate. They have also developed proteins which allow them to resist the heavy metals which are very much part of the acidic environment.
Acid pools are the result of bacteria that use sulfur as their food source, and they produce sulfuric acid, which lowers the pH. And this produces these devilish, poisonous conditions, which only they can live in. We couldn't live in that environment.
Most of these craters aren't even 900 years old. They owe their unusually acidic nature and their color to the work of extremophile bacteria who degrade heavy metals.
In this case, the green-yellow color is due to sulfur, colloidal sulfur, which is suspended in the body of water. And then we get orange colors due to arsenic and antimony, purple colors due to manganese, white due to silica on the surface, and red due to iron deposition, and black due to iron sulfides.
The stiltfoot, this bird with leather-covered feet, doesn't seem to care about the environment. But what can it find that's living?
pH is about 2.5, which is about, this is like vinegar.
However, many larvae grow in this vinegar. They breathe through this tube which comes out of the water. Sheltered from the main predators, this spot is a real reproduction site.
There is a very dense ephedrid fly population here. They breed and the larvae grow and develop in the pond, and we think these are the main food source for the leeches that are present. We have a very unusual form of life in these pools. It's a leech. It grows at pH 2 and 35 degrees, and it's very unusual.
The inventory of extremophiles and their ecosystems has only begun. Their discovery has immediately led to the formulation of new hypotheses of the origins of life on Earth, and perhaps elsewhere.
We know that the primitive oceans were highly saline environments, that extremophile microorganisms weren't the result of adaptation, but are living fossils.
Scientists believe that acidophilic hot pools on other planets may have been the source of the true origin of life.
This river is so extreme that we can use it to understand what life is, and whether these forms of life could reproduce themselves on other planets.
In hot environments, suffocating temperatures and the sun's burning rays must be endured. And sometimes there are also toxic substances present, like sulfur or mercury. All the same, some creatures flourish here, thanks to astonishing adaptations which particularly interest scientists. We're going to follow their trail to the hottest and least hospitable places on our planet. It's hard to imagine that 10,500 years ago, a vast savanna stretched out here. The Sahara is the largest and most arid desert in the world. Only the Tuareg and a few brave souls dare to roam here. Régis Belleville is one of a very few European camel drivers. A real expert on the desert, He is the guide for Christian Peters, a CNRS researcher and ant specialist. They are looking for the queen of the desert, the silver ant. To find the ants, they must go to a part of the Sahara that gets less than 15 millimeters of water a year.
On dromedary journeys, it's absolutely vital that dehydration is managed. That's because you're making considerable efforts in that heat for 8 or 9 hours march every day, which means you're constantly at your limits, because there's a constant risk that your internal temperature will rise significantly, and that will have a drastic effect on your hydration.
In hot environments, creatures are subject to harsh conditions. During the day, the dromedary is capable of raising its body temperature to 42 degrees to sweat as little as possible. But the silver ant can raise its internal temperature to 54 degrees. This is the absolute record for any creature on Earth.
So do you often find silver ants during your desert crossings?
Oh yes, quite regularly. In all the big sandy regions, even in a hyper-arid part of the Sahara, a place where there's absolutely no vegetation. And while the ants are still there, they can still survive in an environment where there's nothing left, no other insects.
The silver ant is the only insect capable of crossing the burning sand during the hottest hours of the day. Christian and Régis want to discover its secrets.
Look, there's a nest. And yes, that's the right kind. That's the silver ant, Cataglyphis bombacina. And you see, it's silver because its abdomen is covered with very dense hairs, which reflect the sun's rays.
Its tightly packed hairs have another function. They trap a thin layer of air, thus creating an insulated space which reduces perspiration and thereby the loss of water. But that isn't enough to explain the astonishing resistance of this insect.
And another thing is that they have very long legs, and so that keeps the sand away from them when they walk on the burning surface.
Like this, their abdomens are 4 millimeters above the ground. Just like that, at that height, the temperature has already dropped by 7 degrees. Their legs finish with pincers that act like spikes on the sand. With this kind of footwear, the ants are capable of traveling at over a meter per second. At that speed, the air current generated beneath their abdomen prevents them from being fried on the spot. Less well equipped against the heat, its direct predators, like lizards, can't stand ground temperatures above 70 degrees. So the way is clear for the ants to collect the bodies of insects fried by the sun and to have a fine barbecue. But how can they know where they are in a landscape of such similar dunes and then find the minuscule entrance to their nest?
This work is bringing a body back to the nest. A lot of other ants use chemical trails to find their directions relative to their nests. But here, in this environment, chemical markers don't work because the sand is always moving and it isn't a good surface for the molecules. So this ant has to be able to tell where it is visually. So how does it do it? We might have thought that it used tufts of grass as landmarks, but there is no such thing. There are no tufts of grass. And researchers have found that the ant is capable of reading the angle of the sun and can locate itself relative to that angle.
Certain facets of their eyes allow them to perceive lines of light in the sky which are invisible to the human eye. So they can determine their position by the angle which their body forms with these lines.
So this little worker has brought back the cricket's leg from the other side of the dune without following a chemical trail. It has managed to find the little entrance hole to the nest uniquely by visual orientation. Not bad, eh?
Navigating by sight in the desert implies a very specific form of organization for the colony as a whole. These ants are carrying young workers. And the carriers are all running in the same direction. So what is this strange ride for?
So I followed several workers who all led us to the nest. It's 21 meters away from the first one, and these two nests both belong to the same colony and have a single queen. With this species, there's no chemical trail on the sand, and the old workers have to transport the young workers to the new nest so that they can work there.
This surprising transport operation gives visual references to the young workers, so they know how to find the different nests and can then fully take part in the colony's life.
When you walk in the desert here, you only see a very small part of the colony. Most of the colony is buried beneath the earth away from the heat. And most people don't realize that they only see a tiny part of the ant society.
After having tamed the sun, the silver ant has found how to use the sand to help it survive. Digging down, the ants find an agreeable temperature of 25 degrees. Christian wants to understand how these ants manage to fashion their nest in a material as unstable as sand.
It seems, Christian, that the nest is under this clump of camel grass. It's a typical grass here which we call spot.
In a period of extreme drought, with no rainfall, these roots would keep the structure intact.
Of course, that would be because of the desert winds.
Even though the roots form the roof structure of the nest, the silver ant needs special skills to dig and form the sand.
The capacity to manipulate sand is really essential to the silver ant, because it has to dig subterranean chambers. To do this, the ants take balls of damp sand from the inside to the outside. And they have very long mouth parts, which allows them to hold onto the ball of sand, which they dispose of outside.
As well, their long mandibles are covered with adhesive hairs that allows them to hold on to the balls of sand.
They also have to maintain the nest entrance because this entrance blocks up with sand. And so the ants have a unique behavioral adaptation, which is to use their forelegs to push the sand away.
The silver ants are completely adapted to these desert conditions. Their survival depends on the sun and the sand dunes. but the effect of heat can lead to ground becoming as hard as rock. The silver ant could not live in this stony desert. Death Valley is the second hottest place on Earth. This desert region of Southern California is protected by a mountain range that is over 4,000 meters high. When air reaches the other side of these mountains, it has lost all its humidity. The temperature of the air can rise to 57 degrees and be over 93 degrees on the ground. Don Sada is one of the rare scientists to venture into this furnace. "2,000 years ago, this valley was covered by a salt lake. The lake has totally vanished today, leaving behind a thick salt crust. In such an arid and desolate place, where might life take refuge?
Here we are at Badwater, and there's a snail that lives right next to the springs here at Badwater. It survives only under the salt crust here. And it's found only associated with the salt here on the floor of Death Valley.
Salt is usually particularly noxious for snails, but in this case, it's a species which is perfectly adapted to this micro-ecosystem. This snail feeds on an algae which only grows here, under this salt crust. To survive in such a corrosive environment, its organism secretes a viscous liquid which protects it from salt burns. But why are all these snails massed here?
In the summer, and the soil can get as hot as 100 degrees centigrade. It never gets warmer than about 55 centigrade underneath this salt crust. They only occur along this one eastern edge of Badwater, not on the western side, only where the water is freshest, coming off the mountains behind us, through the ground, coming to the surface, and providing fresh water that these snails can be associated with.
Contrary to what one might think, springs are many and varied in Death Valley. They have become the ultimate refuge of the pupfish. Once, these fish swam in a gigantic lake. A little over 10,000 years ago, the lake retreated and the surviving pupfish found themselves isolated in springs where the temperature and the salinity vary considerably. Don Sada is en route towards one of the least hospitable springs in Death Valley, in which live the most resistant variety of pupfish in the world.
Their ancestors survived and lived in estuaries where there are wide ranges in daily change in dissolved oxygen concentrations and temperatures and very difficult conditions. So their ancestors were able to survive in those conditions, and when they arrived here in Death Valley a million years or so ago, they had the pre-adaptation to survive these harsh conditions. Now they've evolved additional abilities to survive even harsher conditions than you find in estuaries, and that's why they've been able to stay and live and persist in Death Valley.
This variety of pupfish can stand water temperatures that vary from 4 degrees in winter to 45 degrees in summer. To be able to stand such a range of temperatures, the cells of their organism fabricate a thermic shock protein.
This is a very harsh environment for pupfish. The salinity is more than twice that of the oceans. Water temperature is about 40 degrees centigrade, and dissolved oxygen is less than 1 part per million. This is a harsh environment even for pupfish. Very few species of fish can occupy this type of habitat.
And when the water level drops, their living conditions can become even more precarious.
Oh, look at this. Small pools, isolated, full of fish. They've been concentrated here as the water's evaporated and disappeared upstream and downstream. I've never seen this before. There must be thousands of fish in here. They will be dead within several days.
So as not to get trapped, the pupfish have to climb the thin stream of water to the spring. Many will perish during this race against the clock. But the survivors will repopulate the spring the next year, thanks to their capacity to reproduce rapidly and in great numbers.
It's a humbling experience to watch life flourish under such harshness, to me. And the desert is hot and dry, but it's about the water in the desert. It's all about water. If we don't have water, we don't have life. We don't have anything but rocks. We don't have the sculptured mountains without water. Water structures everything in the desert.
Thousands of years ago, it was hot water springs linked to volcanic activity that sculpted these limestone rocks known as travertines. In another American state, at the heart of Yellowstone National Park, you can watch the birth of this limestone formation as it happens. Over 200 geysers and 10,000 hot springs are to be found here. In some of them, the temperature can reach 100 degrees. Yellowstone Park is actually a gigantic volcano which has collapsed upon itself. Yellowstone offers one of the richest and best protected ecosystems in the United States. But lava continues to build up 10 kilometers below ground. When water from rivers and streams enters the ground through infiltration, it heats up and springs from the ground in the form of geysers. This water isn't just boiling, but also highly toxic because it is charged with sulfur and mercury when it comes up through the rocks. Microbiologist Gil Geisy is interested in zygogonium. This algae has an enormous concentration of mercury, which is highly toxic. However, the algae is at the bottom of an astonishing food chain.
So here we have a algal mat, and the water here is very acidic. It's around a pH of 2, which is about the same acidity as vinegar. So I have to put on these knee pads in order to protect my clothing. You can see I forgot one day and it ate up my fabric. The zygogonium mats are filamentous green algae that harbor a diverse microbial community, including single-cell chlorella type algae, as well as bacteria. And those bacteria concentrate mercury from the water into the algal mat.
This environment at the limits of life is, however, the cradle of the soldier fly larvae.
The adult fly initially lays its egg in the zygogonium mat, and they provide protection for those eggs from predators. It also provides a source of food.
Feeding directly on the zygogonium, the fly larvae ingest mercury as well. Usually, toxic substances such as mercury are transmitted all along the food chain, and their levels increase from link to link.
Oh, look at this. This is a predatory insect that feeds on the soldier fly larvae. And we would anticipate that the concentrations of mercury would be higher in this species than the soldier fly larvae.
With such a concentration of mercury, all the animals dependent on the zygogonium should be poisoned and die rapidly. But against all expectations, the level of mercury found in the predator's body is really tiny. The fly larvae, who are the first link in this chain, seem to have found a defense against this poison.
Oh, here's a large one. This is approximately 3.5 centimeters in length. It's about a day or two away from emerging as an adult.
What kind of adaptation has allowed them to make the mercury harmless?
This is the gut of the soldier fly larvae. This is where we suspect are bacteria that detoxify the mercury that they ingest during their normal feeding activities on the algae. We suspect that these bacteria are similar to those that exist out in the environment that remove mercury from a toxic form to a less toxic form. And it's possible that they took up those microorganisms and adapted to the environment in their gut and helped remove mercury so that it would not accumulate at high a concentration in their tissues.
The fly larvae have been able to make use of the microorganisms found in the toxic waters of Yellowstone.
Yellowstone Park is going through changes as we speak. New hot springs are being formed, new chemistry is taking place in the water, and the microorganisms that find themselves there have to adapt to those changes or they perish.
Above a certain temperature, only bacteria are capable of resisting. It is these bacteria which lead to an astonishing range of colors. These colors are therefore indicators of the presence of thermophile microorganisms. That is to say, microorganisms which only live between 45 and 70 degrees.
What do we got here, John? pH 3.05, temperature 72 degrees. We guessed right.
Biologists Tim McDermott and John Varley study these microorganisms.
So we wouldn't want to tumble in there.
No, but these thermophilic bacteria would. In fact, they live here all the time and they love it here. It's home sweet home. So in a place like Yellowstone, people can actually see the microbes, okay? Oftentimes you think, well, microbes are so small, you have to have a microscope to see them. But in this case, there are so many of them, they form these thick mats.
To understand just how many bacteria are present in one of these mats, let's take a side trip inside our mouths and have a look at dental plaque. Our dental plaque is made up of thousands of bacteria which join together to form masses. On another scale entirely, there are millions, even billions of bacteria forming these bacterial mats in Yellowstone.
A lot of times people, visitors of the park, they walk by here, my guess is they see these colors and they think it's rocks. Yeah. Don't realize it's living bacteria. Yeah. Let's see. Nice thick mats here, several centimeters thick. These particular mats take a long time to grow back. So if a hailstorm comes along and punches holes in these mats, such as we have here, it will take several weeks to months for this to grow back together again and reseal itself. That's in contrast to some other hot spring mats that grow back in a day or two. They regenerate very, very rapidly.
This regeneration is in fact the result of a complex mechanism. To form a microbe mat, bacteria attach themselves to a surface. Then they sprout molecular fibers which allow them to form a mass together. Then the bacteria reproduce and multiply until they form a compact and fairly thick mass.
Gotta be 4 or 5 centimeters, easy. Look at the colors. It goes from the dark brown on top, it grades to green, and then we got this nice, beautiful pink red down at the very bottom. These organisms assemble themselves based on either tolerance, preference of light, sunlight. These different colors correspond to different pigments that will capture different wavelengths of light. And so that's why you see the different colors as you work your way down through the profile. This yellow-orange pigment might actually be protecting the cells from UV, for example. They prefer to be under highlight conditions as opposed to the green layer here that is found at the bottom.
The more light there is, the stronger are the colors in the pigments, a little like our skin, which darkens under the sun. These microbe mats are a delicacy for the Yellowstone flies. They assure the flies of protection from their predators. Well, from most of them. In its search for food, the wolf spider doesn't hesitate to brave the boiling waters. But only the most robust will survive that experience. Because of the altitude, many of the hot springs of Yellowstone have a boiling point which can reach 100 degrees. Despite the surrounding heat, some plants manage to grow around these springs.
Around almost every hot spring, you'll find grasses of varying types growing up against the hot water. The high temperature water cools off very rapidly, such that these plants can grow in these environments. But there are some plants that are very, very interesting. One known as, its scientific name is dicanthelium, but its more generic name is hot springs panic grass. It looks like weeds in my front yard, but it's this grass right there with the purple edges to the grass leaves. This particular plant has a fungus growing associated with its roots. And researchers at Montana State University have shown that this fungus relationship with this plant is what allows this plant to grow at these higher temperatures and tolerate high temperatures. The mechanism is not yet known, right? But somehow this fungus is imparting some protective measure or causing the plant to react some way that allows it to protect itself from these higher temperatures.
Only the most resistant plants have managed to adapt to such inhospitable conditions. The water temperature is just as tough for microorganisms. The green color of this spring comes from the organisms which live there. They have chlorophyll, a pigment which captures light energy. Above 72 degrees, photosynthesis becomes impossible. In the second spring, visible on the right, the temperature gets up to 80 degrees. The water is red and contains another type of microorganism. Differences in temperature represent real physical frontiers for microscopic life forms. The surprising colors of the edges of these springs are in fact the result of an astonishing biological mechanism, chemosynthesis.
So the difference between photosynthesis and chemosynthesis is all in the energy source. We know trees, plants, grass, etc., they use the sun as a source of energy, solar energy. Whereas bacteria that are involved in chemosynthesis use minerals as a source of energy. Arsenic, iron, sulfur, hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen. These are all very, very high energy sources for bacteria that they use on a very regular basis. And Yellowstone is an awesome place to find these kinds of bacteria practicing this kind of metabolism.
It's even possible to determine the chemical composition of hot springs just by looking at their color, which signals the presence or the absence of certain minerals.
Okay, John, we're going to sample here to look at the sulfide concentrations associated with this particular spring. We think what's going on here is that the sulfide is associated with sulfide oxidizing bacteria that forms the elemental sulfur, the yellow color. And so the sulfide corresponds to certain kinds of bacteria. And then we're going to sample over here where there's no yellow color, which I expect won't have any sulfide. We'll see if I'm right. I was right. The blue color indicates we have a lot of sulfide in this particular spring, and the clear color means, or the no color, means there's no sulfide. Now, the reason that's important is because in some cases, some microbes eat sulfide as an energy source. They actually eat it. We call it eating at the Hard Rock Cafe. As opposed to some microbes are poisoned by sulfide. So it's a question of who can use what. Sometimes it's a poison, sometimes it's food. That's the case, that's the way it works in the microbial world.
Some bacteria manage still to find energy in the most unexpected part of the park, in the depths of Lake Yellowstone. To observe these bacteria, the scientists use a radio-controlled robot equipped with a camera and a multitude of captors. And they discover a fascinating spectacle which they scarcely expected. Under the water, the gas emissions become visible. Thousands of bubbles spring from the Earth's entrails. The hot water springs continue to flow, even at the very deepest part of the lake. And they too are the start point for a food chain. Thousands of microorganisms turn in a circle around these springs. But what are they? What are they feeding upon? In order to know more, John and Tim take samples of the microorganisms with the help of a net.
I can see copepods and diaphnids in here. They're both crustaceans, they're both cousins to lobsters and crabs, but they're very minute. And they form a very important part of the food chain.
Daphnia and copepod are microscopic crustaceans. They filter water and live mainly on plankton. In Lake Yellowstone, they have another source of nutrition.
But they're attracted to these hydrothermal vents that form a long column from the floor of the lake to the surface. And that column is just filled with bacteria that are enriched by the hydrothermal vent. And so the copepods and diaphnids form a ring around this and take advantage of that very, very rich food resource that the hydrovent is giving them.
From that, the Daphnia and copepod become in their turn an important food source for the many fish in the lake, and especially for salmon. Thanks to its hot springs, Lake Yellowstone is in fact an oasis of life.
The vents that are scattered underneath the west thumb of Yellowstone Lake here are hot springs vents. We call them hydrothermal vents when they're submerged like that. And they're very much like the deep sea smokers that occur in a number of places in the sea.
It is in fact beneath the sea that the hottest springs on the planet are to be found. Their temperature can reach 400 degrees. These hydrothermal springs are formed on the mid-ocean ridges where the continental plates are moving apart. At a depth of many thousands of meters, seawater infiltrates into the faults and heats rapidly against the magma. They spring forth in deep-sea smokers, hydrothermal vents. We're going on the Atalanta, a research ship of the Ifremer which is on a mission to study hydrothermal springs. This ship is a real floating laboratory. Aboard the ship, microbiologist Marianne Cambon-Bonavita is getting ready to make a descent down into the abyss.
And here all along the way, there are a whole lot of little surface features that could be chimneys.
She takes her place aboard the Nautilus, a miniature submarine capable of diving to a depth of 6,000 meters. The Nautilus and her team dives deeper and deeper into the permanent night of the great depths. The descent will take almost 2 hours. To find their way in this darkness, abyssal life produces its own light. At 4,000 meters depth, the darkness is total, and without light, no photosynthesis. It is therefore the minerals which are the starting point for an ecosystem whose richness never stops surprising researchers.
So in fact, there's a large biomass around the hydrothermal springs. They were even called the oases of life when they were discovered in 1977. Because in fact, there's a whole specialized food chain based on chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis involves the chemistry of hydrothermal springs, which is volcanic and emits composites like hydrogen, methane, and hydrogen sulfate, and which the microorganisms then use to make organic material, which in turn is used as food by living creatures, and a whole fauna develops around these springs in a concentric manner.
Some of these microorganisms can only live at temperatures higher than 80 degrees. Scientists have even observed microorganisms capable of reproducing at 113 degrees. In such conditions, bacteria give up their place to more evolved organisms, the archaea.
So these are very evolved organisms, which have adaptations around their membranes, which is fluid only at high temperatures. If you put them at 60 degrees, it's as if they were deep frozen. All their cellular machinery, their proteins, their enzymes are adapted to high temperature. They have different creases, and their DNA is highly protected so as to remain stable at high temperature. These really are evolved organisms and perfectly adapted to these conditions.
Some hydrothermal springs expel hydrogen sulfate, a deadly element for most creatures. However, these worms seem perfectly at ease in this hostile environment. Their red gills bathe in warm fluids. They extract the hydrogen sulfate. Their digestive system is replaced by a kind of pouch that contains microorganisms. These transform the hydrogen sulfate into organic matter, which the worm feeds upon. Everything lives in perfect symbiosis. Thanks to the articulated arm of Nautilus, the team has been able to take several specimens, which are taken to the laboratory.
I think that it's the same shrimp you find everywhere. There are different stages, young, adults.
Shrimp are the creatures the most frequently seen around hydrothermal springs. One of these, recognizable because of its bloated head, has especially attracted the scientists' attention.
The Rimicarsis hydrothermal shrimp has in its head a system of symbiosis with several types of bacteria, which are capable of using either methane, hydrogen sulfate, or iron to produce organic material. The shrimp also has a lot of microorganisms in its digestive system, which also probably furnish the shrimp with organic material. And in exchange, the shrimp lives permanently in a mixture of seawater and the fluids so as to feed the bacteria it has.
Scientists have just begun to understand how life is organized around hydrothermal springs.
On each new expedition, we found new species beside the hydrothermal springs, simply because these are habitats which are separate from each other. Between two hydrothermal springs, there are many, even hundreds of kilometers, and so life is adapted to each hydrothermal spring. There are a whole lot of new species discovered each year around these extreme environments.
Did life on Earth first appear beside hydrothermal springs? This hypothesis is still being debated within the scientific community. But the discovery of organisms adapted to very hot water and using minerals as a source of energy has completely overturned our knowledge of the world of life. To the point where nowadays some scientists theorize that life could develop even on the most inhospitable planets. Extremophile heat creatures not only push back the limits of life, but the limits of our knowledge. In cold environments, microorganisms are the kings. They form the basis of fragile ecosystems, which are menaced by global warming. These creatures possess astonishing equipment, which allows them to survive in these hostile environments. Their adaptations are of particular interest to scientists. We're going to follow their trail to the coldest places on Earth, to Spitzberg, Greenland, and Antarctica. Spitzberg is an island in the archipelago of Svalbard in the Arctic Circle. It's an extreme environment because of freezing temperatures that can drop as far as -30 degrees. There are but 2 seasons, 9 months of long, dark and glacial winter, followed by 3 months of short, sunny and cool summer. The Spitzberg scientific expedition has the mission of cataloging the microfauna and flora during that short summer period. The expedition is made up of biology students, accompanied by their teacher, Jean-Michel Bichin, researcher at the Museum of Natural History in Paris.
According to him, that's the best place, and we can land easily with the Zodiac as well.
All the team will spend a month on the island, relying only on themselves.
We have to see if there's a stream, so that we can have water during our stay. If we can find a dry spot that's a little elevated, that'll give us an observation point. Beside the mountain wouldn't be bad to shelter us from the valley winds, as well as to see any visit from a bear.
Cataloguing the biodiversity of Spitzberg means confronting 3 extreme environments: glaciers, steep cliffs, and tundra. To this rather unwelcoming picture is added the presence of polar bears. These lords of the ice are often presented as the principal victims of global warming. But along with the polar bear, thousands of species are menaced with extinction, and some haven't even been catalogued yet.
We know that global warming is going so fast that the Arctic ecosystems are in immediate danger, which means we consider they will survive between 25 and 50 years. So that's the context we're in as an Arctic biodiversity expedition. We're responding to a really urgent need, that of knowing more about the endangered ecosystems.
During the brief summer season on Spitzberg, the sun never sets and shines all day. It's the ideal period to study the vegetation which is in full growth. Come on, off we go. On its first day, the expedition will attack the great flat areas close to sea level where the tundra develops. This vegetation hugs the ground and is perfectly adapted to the Arctic environment. Even though the surface layer of soil melts during the summer, it is poor in mineral salts. This limits growth rates and density of the vegetation considerably.
As soon as there's a shelter where seeds can build up, where sediment grows, vegetation finds a place immediately. There you've typically got a pretty clump of dryas settling in. Once the plants have rooted down there, they'll try to colonize around them. You see it here, for example. So, roughly speaking, the aim is to hang on and then gain centimeters here and there.
So how did these plants manage to colonize cold and completely barren terrain? They take the form of a compact cushion which allows them to store heat. It's an efficient means of conquering terrain because certain plants can live for more than 100 years.
There are two explanations for that. It offers good wind resistance, but this compact form also protects from the cold, and beside that, the plants will die and thus create their own humus, their own organic matter for those plants that come after. So in fact, they create surface soil made up by the generations of plants which die in that place.
These cushions of vegetation thus serve as compost for other plants, such as Pedicularis hirsuta, the hairy lousewort. This plant, which is perfectly acclimatized, makes a sort of duvet to protect it from the cold. Its hairs are wrapped so tightly that they imprison air and act as thermal insulation. They also block harmful rays from the sun. What is more astonishing is that the densest and most developed vegetation is to be found in an even more extreme environment, on the sharp slopes of cliffs.
Hey, look there. You see, just there, you've got areas of rock slides, and between the rock slides, at the foot of the pillars there, you've really got an area with green platforms. I think we should take a look over there. We're going to climb it there on the flank. We don't really know what type of terrain we'll meet. It's probably unstable ground. There are really some highly eroded places. As in every biodiversity study, reaching the ecosystems isn't an easy task for some of them. That's also the reward, taking a certain number of risks to get to places that sometimes no one has ever observed. Such as this zone here, which is an extreme zone within an extreme place. Well, that's unexpected. Really unexpected. We've got plants with fruits and flowers.
But how do the plants find organic material in such an inhospitable environment?
The fact of finding plants at a more advanced stage in this environment, suspended from the cliff flank 100 meters up, is really very surprising. At the same time, it's not really a mystery. We're just below a bird colony, so crudely put, here the food falls from the sky. Here there is guano, brought by the birds, which brings nitrogen, a nutritive material, which allows a whole lot of bacteria, mosses and lichens to colonize this site.
To completely catalogue the microfauna of Spitzberg, it will be necessary to approach these migratory birds who carry many parasites. Notably ticks, who travel well attached to the feathers of their hosts. They come from very far away, sometimes from hot countries, to conquer Spitzberg. A voyage sometimes made at the expense of the bird. As the ticks drink the bird's blood, they also give them Lyme's disease.
Ah, look, an Arctic seagull. This body isn't very old, and probably comes from the big colonies you can see at the top of the cliff. So there's no other way of observing them close up, except by the bodies which are found at the base of the cliff. On some of these birds, you can see, that's what I'm trying to do, whether there are parasites. Here in this is a real thermal blanket for acarians. Not only is there no chance of falling off, it's also very warm.
But the soft warmth of this blanket isn't enough to survive such a long voyage. Some ticks have developed exceptional resistance to variations in temperature. They can go from 40 to -30 degrees without any difficulty. How can the tick resist polar temperatures without its blood freezing? By producing an antifreeze, glycerol. Thanks to that, their cells only start to freeze beyond -20 degrees. So it's not surprising to find ticks in the most inhospitable places on the Earth. Beyond these cliffs, another extreme environment shelters life. These altitude lakes are on the high plains of Spitzberg. Their water freezes during most of the year, a hostile environment for living creatures.
And here we have a little stream which comes from the valley behind. Several smaller streams merge downstream, and there's quite a bit of vegetation on the banks. So it should be quite a good place. I hope to find crustaceans, small crustaceans. They're very hard to see. In any case, there'll be microfauna as usual. You see, we're not badly off here. This is a very fine mesh, 100 micrometers. That's 1/10 of a millimeter, and we'll get organisms of that size.
First of all, the net will filter the microalgae, which abound in this cold water. They're the basis of the food chain. In a way, they act as a fuel for gelatinous organisms. These organisms ingest the microalgae and they get energy from them. In return, the microalgae are protected from the ice by the cellular membrane of their host, which is perfectly adapted to the cold.
We're mostly looking at little creatures here, that is, invertebrates that live in mosses, in soil, in bedding, and beneath stones. We're looking for what is both the hidden part and the largest part of biodiversity, that which modifies soils, that which is the basis of food chains, the workers of ecosystems.
Daphnia are a good example. Daphnia are little crustaceans which feed primarily on microalgae. They can filter thousands in an hour. They have a vital role since by removing the algae, they stop them from asphyxiating the environment. The sun's rays, so rare on Spitzberg, therefore can penetrate the depths of the lake more easily and help other organisms to develop, such as the copepod. When conditions deteriorate and the lake freezes, Daphnia and copepod produce eggs which are more solid than usual so as to assure their survival. The membrane of these eggs is capable of standing up to pressure, salt, or ice. The eggs detach themselves from the mother's body to fall to the bottom of the lake and await more favorable conditions before hatching.
Ah, a copepod. So there's one, super sample. These are the first crustaceans that I've seen in the Svalbard, at any rate in the field. And that's really marvelous. Look, there's another one. Great. The species that we can qualify as extremophile are completely dependent on the conditions that rule here, on the ice that protects them during winter from extreme temperatures and conditions, and the water available in summer, which allows life to develop. This means that the slightest change, and I'm talking here about global changes such as global warming, will have to bring on the complete disruption of these ecosystems with the disappearance of species which are completely adapted to these extreme conditions.
Global warming also has an effect on the terrain. Over 40 years, the Spitzberg glaciers have retreated many kilometers. For the expedition, the approach to these glaciers is even more painful and difficult because the ground is cracked and eroded by the meltwater. The ice front is a place that is very poor in organic material, and it takes a watchful eye to find organisms adapted to such extreme conditions.
We lift the stones along the neve. The temperature is a bit more than 0, but there I can see little springtails jumping. There's a tiny fauna developing inside here.
Springtails are one of the rare organisms capable of surviving in such conditions.
They're right at the start of the ecosystem, but these are very short ecosystems. In all extreme environments, ecosystems are reduced. Here, it isn't plants which directly supply organic material, at least locally. The organic matter has certainly been brought here by the wind or the glacier's movements, or perhaps by bacteria, which can produce organic matter from minerals.
So the springtails seek their food at the foot of the glaciers, in mud and under stones. To find their way in such an opaque universe, they have a long pair of antennae. Their body is covered with hooked hairs, which allow them to imprison air and which gives them an oxygen reserve whilst immersed in mud. The snow is scarcely an obstacle to them. Springtails secrete an antifreeze protein, which inhibits the formation of ice crystals up to a temperature of -6 degrees.
These little creatures will benefit by consuming, and will perhaps be consumed by 1 or 2 other species. We saw spiders a little lower, so there could also be spiders at this altitude. I don't know.
To escape their predators, the springtails have a secret weapon. A jumping spring is found beneath their abdomen. When it lets go, it allows them to jump instantly more than 10 centimeters, which is on our scale equivalent to jumping over the Eiffel Tower.
It might be less difficult for them to be in this area of the glacier because temperatures vary less during the year. Extreme conditions aren't caused just by cold, but by temperature variations. Here it's cushioned, so to speak, so even if it seems very cold for fauna, it's less difficult to go from -12 to +1 than from -12 to +15.
In cold environments, does life stop at the foot of the glacier? To find out, we're going on the ice shelf of Greenland, the Inlandsys. It's one of the most extreme places on Earth. The cold is constant, and there is no vegetation. The Inlandsys formed 250,000 years ago. It's 3 times bigger than France and as much as 3,000 meters thick. It's an immense ice desert which contains by itself 10% of all the fresh water on Earth. Accompanied by his assistant, Catherine Perrott, Professor Alain Coutet from the Museum of Natural History of Paris is here to study organisms capable of developing in this icy hell. To complete his mission, he is supported by a team of glacionauts, specialists in the exploration of subglacial caves. During 10 days, the members of the expedition will be completely on their own. In such an extreme environment, climatic conditions change rapidly. For protection, the laboratory has to be set up before nightfall.
Listen, nothing's broken. There's a light. That's great.
And well, everything's ready for work. But what a slog. It's hellish work to bring all that, a real exploit. But in order to study the extremophiles in their environment, this has to be done. With the snow, the rain and the humidity, it's awful. But to get living organisms and study them properly, you have to.
The team takes advantage of the first night on the ice to rest and enjoy a thrilling display of the aurora borealis. At the break of day, Alain Coutet and Catherine Perrott go in hunt of organisms which have managed to establish themselves in this hostile place. But first you have to know where to look.
Ah yes, look, a very nice cryoconite hole. It was always thought that on glaciers there was no life, and well, finally that's not true. There's life everywhere. However, it's in these tiny little holes, and the organisms that live here are microscopic. These holes are called cryoconite holes. That means cryo dust and conite cold.
These holes, which are in fact found all over the ice sheet, appear astonishingly cylindrical. But how can nature fashion such perfect shapes?
Cryoconite holes have been a mystery for years. Now we understand their creation better. In fact, they're caused by mineral and organic particles brought by the winds. These particles fall on the ice, and when the sun shines, they heat more quickly than the ice. They melt the ice around, and some will spin around on the ice, making a little cylindrical hole in the ice. They finish up by falling to the bottom, which is what makes that brown matter we can see in the bottom of all the holes.
These holes are in fact a true, if unstable, micro-ecosystem. They can evaporate beneath the sun or freeze at any moment of the day. In this precarious environment, somehow life has managed to develop.
And this substance, which we're bringing up with a syringe, is made up of microorganisms. We recover what we've sampled, and then the only way of seeing if there is in fact life is to look at it under the microscope.
Isolating organisms so small and in such a compact environment as the cryoconite is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It requires tools that are no bigger than a strand of hair. In the microscopic world, a single drop of water can contain a whole food chain. The cryoconites are made essentially of thousands of minerals and microalgae. These algae are the main producers of energy in this micro-ecosystem. By using photosynthesis, thanks to the sun, they make organic matter. This organic material is the favorite meal of rotifers. These strange creatures owe their name to two crowns of lashes which encircle their head and act like a wheel. They spin in opposing directions to bring nutritious particles to their mouths.
There aren't many predators here. There are the rotifers and the tardigrade. The tardigrade is the lord of nature here, the top of the food chain. Beyond that, there's nothing else living in this ecosystem.
The tardigrade, the super predator that rules here on the Greenland ice sheet, doesn't measure more than a millimeter.
There are so many cryoconites. There are lots of dark masses. You have to try to find this creature which is transparent, sometimes with a small brown mark, and sometimes it doesn't move, so you really must be vigilant and look at each little part of the preparation.
Tardigrades are amongst the smallest multicelled creatures. They're also known as water bears because of their strange way of moving. They don't swim, but use their impressive claws to hold onto fragments of vegetation, which gives them a shambling appearance. We find them everywhere on Earth, from the summits of the Himalayas to the depths of the ocean, and that's certainly because of their astonishing capacity to resist extreme temperatures.
It's a creature which can resist the cold by sleeping in the same way as a bear and waking when conditions become favorable once more. When a cryoconite hole freezes, it will be caught in the ice, and that won't kill it. When the ice melts, it wakes, and we think that that capacity to preserve its life is due to a substance, a sugar called trehalose, and we think it gets that sugar from the microscopic algae which can make it.
This sugar is diffused in the creature's body and acts like an antifreeze. It also protects the membranes of its cells against the attacks of the cold. Alain Coutet wants to observe in the field an even more astonishing adaptation of the tardigrade.
There doesn't look bad. Can you see the different layers of colors? And there are drain-offs. We can sample in that area there, but we have to find an easy place.
Well, listen, I think we should go a bit higher. No problem to do that. There's a good face. That should be perfect for it.
One of our objectives is to descend into these shafts to gain access to very old ice. You see, the ice is created by snow accumulation. Every year, 25 meters of snow compacts, makes layers and traps creatures and algae which are at the surface. By descending to the depths, we arrive at centuries which are distant from us, 4 centuries, 5 centuries, 6 centuries. In some layers, we may be able to bring tardigrades which are 5 centuries old out of the ice and see if they are capable of coming back to life. That's an experiment we can't make in the laboratory. There's a place where organisms have been trapped, and you can see elsewhere things trickling. We'll have a thorough look, take away the superficial part and recover the trapped organisms if possible.
These images, obtained by an electronic microscope, are exceptional. They show the astonishing capacity for adaptation of the tardigrade. When it is trapped in the ice, the tardigrade can put its vital functions on hold. The creature expels all the water from its body. It shrivels and limits its activity to the strict minimum. It can stay in this state for hundreds of years until conditions are once again favorable. Ice moulins are the only means of access to tardigrades trapped in ice that is over 5 centuries old. These impressive caverns, which can be over 100 meters deep, are carved by meltwater. When the temperature drops, the water freezes and the walls harden. The ice cave then becomes accessible. Glacianaut Serge Aviot has already descended to 173 meters below the surface in one of these shafts. He holds the world record. When the temperature increases again, water streams down the sides of the shaft and they become unusable. That's why Serge Aviot watches the situation all the time. His descent to retrieve an ice core that is many centuries old is a real voyage in time.
What's the point of understanding this capacity of resisting death? It's a philosophical problem to start with because we're between life and death. If we can understand how the tardigrade resists these conditions of dehydration and apparent death, we could be able to apply it to man. It's a kind of dream. It would require analogous conditions, substances which could be injected, etc. What could keep us alive in face of extreme conditions? Of course, it's a bit of a dream, but it's the kind of things you have to study because it's a purely scientific question all the same.
But let's go back to the surface. It's not unusual to see strange red streaks on the ice sheet. These marks are another opportunity for Alain Coutet to study extremophile organisms.
So there you see, Kathy, the red matter that we have here. It looks like a blood trail, quite typical. These are microscopic algae which are adapted to the cold.
How can these algae develop in direct contact with the ice?
So you can see these red balls we have here. They're actually green algae. It's surprising. They're red and usually they're green. The reality is that they make a substance to protect them from extreme conditions. This substance is red and gives them the appearance of a red globule. That is to say, they have inside their cells a coloured layer which isn't used for photosynthesis but protects them from excess sunlight and at the same time from the cold, antifreeze and sun umbrella. The algae that we find here aren't the same that we find on the ice pack for a simple reason. The ice pack is frozen seawater. Here, it's fresh water. Diving under the ice pack, we can find reservoirs of extraordinary microscopic algae which colour the ice pack underneath in shades of yellow and green, etc., which is quite astonishing.
On the other side of the planet, in Antarctica, the food chain starts beneath the ice pack. Extremophile algae act as a food source for krill. This is the most abundant group of creatures on Earth. In summer, this kind of shrimp gathers in vast groups, which can cover a surface of 500 square kilometers and weigh 2 million tons. Krill is an essential energy source for most of the species living in the frozen waters of Antarctica.
We're going down to 125 meters, 125.
The ARTE scientific mission is studying this food chain in the cold waters of the Antarctic.
It's fine, we're going to 200 meters.
It is directed by Philippe Kubi, professor of the Villefranche-sur-Mer Oceanographic Laboratory. If there are so many krill, it's because of the extraordinary proliferation of cold water vegetal plankton.
Well, there, it's really dense in phytoplankton. It's a real soup. To have a rich supply of plankton, several conditions have to be met. Firstly, things have to favour the development of phytoplankton, i.e. vegetal plankton. As for plants, there has to be light, and there's a lot of light in this summer period around the poles. Next, nutritive salts are needed, and these salts tend to be more concentrated towards the depths. To bring them up to the surface, it requires either storms or upward movement of cold water, and these conditions are met frequently on the Antarctic continental shelf.
Plankton is made up of hundreds of plant and animal species. It is already in itself a true food chain, perfectly adapted to the cold. At the base of the chain are the diatoms, microalgae which appeared on Earth 150 million years ago. In vast numbers, they create more than half of the oxygen which we breathe. Diatom are consumed by foraminifera. These organisms use their filaments to catch their food and to move. Diatom and foraminifera are very simple, made up by a single cell and by a shell. These microscopic shells made of silicon or calcium are true architectural masterpieces. To ensure the best rigidity for their shell, these organisms invented, well before we did, corrugated roofs, cellular fiberboard, and honeycomb structures. Diatom and foraminifera are food in turn for animal plankton. This is essentially made up of crustaceans, jellyfish, and krill. This zooplankton feeds in its turn a strange extremophile fauna which lives below the ice pack. But how do these organisms survive in water that is at -2 degrees?
Adaptation to the cold in a polar environment is made in two fashions. The first possibility is to increase the internal salt quantity. So adding salt to the body means that where the freezing point is becomes a lot better for these creatures. The other possibility is to add tiny organic molecules like sugar or glucose, for example, or other tiny molecules which equally mean that the creature needn't fear freezing at 0 degrees.
It's the ice fish that push adaptive measures the furthest. Philippe Kubi goes to the French research station d'Urmont-d'Urville to use the ROV, a radio-controlled submarine robot capable of diving to more than 100 meters depth, which is where the champion of survival in cold water lives.
There, the ROV is at 174 meters, and in relation to classical fishing, what's good with the ROV is that one can observe the individuals in their environment, explain how its habitat works, and also study its behavior, something which is very, very difficult, in fact impossible to do by fishing. And here we see the typical behavior of these fish. They're fish which tend to wait on the bottom. And there, see, it's a little disturbed, so it moves. And they're on the lookout.
To expend as little energy as possible in the cold waters, the fish sits in currents rich in plankton and only has to wait with its mouth wide open. Thus, the icefish constantly filters the oxygen found in the water because it's the only invertebrate on Earth that doesn't have any hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the pigment which tints our blood red. It carries oxygen through the body. The blood of the icefish has none, which is why their blood is white or transparent. It takes the oxygen it needs directly from the water.
We're in a very cold environment where there is a lot of oxygen, and these fish have gills with a very large surface, so the exchange is better. Their heart is a lot bigger, which improves blood circulation, and oxygen arrives directly in their tissues. This modification probably is only found in cold environments, and probably couldn't happen in other environments.
But at these polar temperatures, the main problem of the icefish and most other fish is avoiding being frozen on the spot. They live in such a cold environment that the water entering their mouths can freeze a part of their digestive system. Luckily for them, they produce a protein which acts on frozen tissue and stops the ice from spreading. But it's Philippe Kubi and his team that risk freezing if they don't return quickly to base because a glacial wind is rising. Katabatic winds are the most violent Antarctic winds, with peaks at 300 kilometers per hour. They slide on the glaciers and accelerate with the cold. On the islands of the far south, a fly has learnt how to resist these winds and this cold. The fly also has anti-freezing sugars to survive these hostile conditions, but the most remarkable adaptation is the loss of its wings. In such an extreme environment, predators are rare, and the need to fly to escape them is no longer a priority. Moreover, this loss offers two big advantages: less surface for the wind to catch and fat reserves which have taken the place of flight muscles. Stocking an energy reserve is the key to survival in the Antarctic for many species, and in particular for the Adelie penguin. This emblematic Antarctic bird is also a model of adaptation. The Adelie penguin and the emperor penguin are in fact the only species to have colonized the lowest latitudes of Earth. On the Dumont d'Urville base, a research program on its capacities to manage energy is completely dedicated to the penguins. It's directed by Mireille Racoeur, CNRS biologist.
The Biomar laboratory was constructed because of the proximity of this colony, which is quite spread out. This allows us to follow a colony, always the same one, because in 80% of cases, the male, which returns the first, is faithful to its nest. So it will return to the same nest and, in theory, find the same female there.
The reproductive period is the ideal moment to study the energy-managing capacities of the penguins. They stock large quantities of fat in order to be able to feed their offspring. So mind you put the cover in place for the chicks. The male has to stay close to the nest all the time to bring warmth and protect the chicks. When a penguin is trapped for analysis, it is therefore vital to isolate the chicks from the attacks of the skuas.
These creatures, alternating between periods of fast and periods of heavy feeding, are capable of becoming almost obese. When they get to the month of October, they're all round. Then they can embark on a period where they fast for 30 days, of at least 20 days for the male if he's hatching the eggs. So they're always on the razor's edge from a point of view of their nutritive budget. And that's what's important. That means that they know how to manage their energy reserve, their period of fast, their period of overfeeding, in an extremely fine way in order to survive.
Mireille Ricoeur has to take tissue samples to completely understand these energy management mechanisms.
We're taking away a few feathers at the site of the incision so that it's as clean as possible because the feathers are really full of infections.
But the feathers are also the best weapon of the penguin to fight against the cold. The penguin has a very dense plumage, 17 feathers per square centimeter. Furthermore, these feathers cover a thick down. Its thermal insulation is almost perfect and allows it to spend long hours in frozen water looking for its food. What is it that allows the penguin to spend so much energy in such a glacial environment? To understand this phenomenon, Mireille Ricoeur takes samples of the fatty tissues of the penguin.
We'll conserve about 200 milligrams of tissue in this liquid nitrogen. Liquid nitrogen is one of the best preserving agents for studying the expression of different genes which are implicated in adipogenesis or in explaining their storage capacity.
The penguin comes out of this experience unharmed. It immediately returns to its chicks that await their food with impatience. Young penguins have extremely rapid growth, which requires as much energy as they use to combat the cold.
At 15 days, about when they're 15 days old, they're not under the incubation pouch anymore. So it's at that moment that they absolutely must put all their thermogenic processes in place, all the metabolic processes which will allow them to stand up to the cold.
These mechanisms, which Mireille Ricoeur calls thermogenic, concern all the processes which allow the penguins to raise their body heat to fight against the cold. When the temperature drops below -20 degrees, the penguin's response is astonishing. It doesn't shiver and it doesn't run to get warm. On the contrary, it becomes immobile. This is because its internal organism is then completely taken up with these processes of fighting against the cold.
These thermogenic processes are situated on the cellular level, or really subcellular, in the little units which are called mitochondria. Mitochondria are often compared to reactors because they provide the energy which is indispensable for the different vital functions of the organism. These mitochondria are capable of uncoupling like a motor which doesn't work well. When it's out of order, the vehicle goes slower and the motor heats up because it's not regulated. Well, mitochondria are a bit similar. So they use energy reserves to produce energy, and when it's unregulated, it produces a little less energy for vital functions and starts producing heat.
The penguin is therefore perfectly adapted to confront the great cold of the Antarctic. But in the context of global warming, these glacial periods are less and less common. When it becomes warm, all these adaptations become handicaps. To ventilate, the penguin lifts its wings and opens its beak wide.
They're practically in a homeothermic state. That is to say, they no longer produce heat because it's very warm. They're in the sun and they're even suffering from the heat because, as you see, they've got their beaks open, they're in polypnea, and so are their chicks. So we can imagine that these creatures, that are very well adapted to the cold, will really suffer from climactic warming.
The penguins can always dive into the frozen water to freshen up while feeding, but climatic warming also menaces most of the species they feed upon.
So whatever kind of fish or organism we're observing, many of these organisms are what is called stenothermal, a term which means that the capacity of the species to adapt in relation to the maximum and minimum temperature can never be more than that of a difference of 4 to 6 degrees. It is well known from physiological studies and studies in biochemistry that a slight increase of temperature can have catastrophic effects on certain species, notably these species here.
The scientific community is in agreement on global planetary warming, and this warming is even more marked at the poles. We know that 1 degree of warming all over the planet means 2 degrees increase at the poles. And that means, concretely, massive and major changes in living conditions for these organisms. That will then mean that these extremophiles, which are particularly adapted to their native conditions, so to say, will be particularly and directly endangered. And these are probably the first organisms on Earth which will heavily suffer from current climate changes.
It took millions of years for these microorganisms to adapt and conquer these freezing environments. It will take perhaps less than 50 years for the greater part of them to become extinct, and with them, entire ecosystems will vanish. In these environments, microorganisms are the kings. Some animals which live in darkness have strange adaptations, like totally white skin, and others are completely blind. To understand the secrets of evolution, scientists are studying how they manage to survive with so little oxygen, food, and light. In the 4 corners of the planet, in Europe, America, Oceania, and in Africa, we're going to discover these true hells. Movile Cave in Romania is surely the most extreme underground environment on the planet. Its isolation for many millions of years has led to the creation of a real microcosm. A drill bore in 1986 led Christian Lescaut to the discovery of this underground cavity, hidden 30 meters beneath the earth.
And this is the third gate of the cave. It's just to protect the underground environment from the contamination from outside. It's a lid separating an atmosphere with normal content in oxygen and carbon dioxide, and that of the cave, which is quite poor in oxygen and is very rich in carbon dioxide.
I remember very clearly that moment after I penetrated through a tight passage. I felt like being an unusual environment. I felt first that it's very, very warm, and I felt the smell of hydrogen sulfide.
In some parts of the cave, hydrogen sulfate is 100 times more concentrated than in the air we breathe.
This sort of caving I don't like so much, and it's more difficult because it's less oxygen here. Yeah?
Though the cave is a hell for human beings, other living creatures can live in it. The deeper one goes, the stranger become the creatures one meets.
I've seen many caves before in Romania, but never so many creatures moving around. It was like in a tropical forest or something like that. So that big question was where the food for these animals come from.
The further Christian Lescu and his team members penetrate into the cave, the more saturated with hydrogen becomes the air. A small underground lake bars their path. This is also the most difficult and dangerous part of the expedition. A siphon has to be crossed, going into this water which is strangely opaque. But it's this sheet of water which is the key to the mystery.
You can smell the hydrogen sulfide, like rotten eggs smell, and the content in oxygen from this lake till the last bell, it becomes lower and lower, and for that is necessary to breathe with a tank and regulator.
This unclear water is in fact covered with a layer of mucus known as biofilm, the starting point for life. An ecosystem is born, starting with a chemical reaction between the water, the microbes, and the hydrogen sulfate found in the cave.
Movile ecosystem is a pyramid. At the base, there is the organic matter, the biofilm produced by microbes, being, let's say, the equivalent of the grass at the surface. Next, there are the grazers, the primary consumers, like isopod, collembola, or small worms, living in this mat, eating it. And they are like rabbits, let's say, at surface. On the top of the pyramid, there are the predators, like Nepa, big spiders, centipedes, which are the equivalent of wolves or foxes on the surface.
As on the surface, scavengers are found. Waste and dead bodies are recovered by the mollusks. They play the role of garbage collectors. The biofilm is in this way a real loam of life in this demonic universe. Christian has been asking himself for a while if other biofilms exist nearby. And when going back to the surface, it's in a sulfurous pool near the cave that he finds the answer.
Could be a good place to look at the specific ecosystem here. Yeah? What do you think? This organic matter is a mixture of fungus, algae, and bacteria. It's very similar with that we have in Movile, but the difference here, there is not only the energy produced by chemical reaction, but also the sun energy.
Thanks to this layer of mucus, all the organisms are in touch with each other, which creates the best possible survival system. Although of course no fish can live in this overly sulfurous water, microfauna similar to Movile's has developed. Thanks to the sun's rays, it's clearly more varied and richer. The very first living organisms doubtless nourished themselves in the same manner. But where does the water in the cave come from when it rains rarely in the southeast of Romania?
We realized that the water doesn't come from the surface and doesn't come because all the limestone are sealed with very fine clay, but it comes from deep springs, could be 1,000 meters, and is not contaminated with any kind of life forms. The question is how these animals inhabited the underground ecosystem. 6 million years ago, the climate was humid and warm, but later, a big dramatic climatic change. The cave was probably open, so some of them found a refugee because they found the same condition they lost at the surface. Humidity, 100%, and 21-degree temperature.
The animals of this prehistoric Noah's Ark had to adapt to this hostile environment. With no sun, their pigmentation disappeared. Some are so transparent that their internal organs can be seen at work. Others have become blind, like this spider and this Nepa that are found in no other place. It seems, however, possible to see traces of eye sockets. But the electronic microscope confirms that the organ itself has completely gone. Not like this other Nepa, which is also a cave dweller that still has its eyes. Its double rostrum is like a prehistoric weapon. One has small teeth to hold the prey. The other is for swallowing the insides of the victim, as if sucking through a straw. To hunt, the Nepa uses a respiratory tube which allows it to get the small amount of air available and to stay afterwards for long periods in the water. Small snails are easy prey, but another Nepa wants to have a part of the feast. The fight begins and finally concludes by mating. Christian has spotted two other Nepas fighting over a centipede. The struggle for survival is the main occupation of the inhabitants of this lost world. A third Nepa has joined in to rip apart the prey. The spider operates on the same hunting ground as the Nepas. This one has just come out of the sticky biofilm, and its hairs are stuck down. These hairs, which are sensitive to the slightest movement in the air, allow it to find its prey. With the help of these impressive hooks, all that's left to do is to grab it. In the Mauvelet cave, evolution sometimes takes strange turns, as when some blind spiders are born with eyes and then lose them. This is in fact the case of the spider Lascona christiani, which is named after Christian.
Is the famous spider Lascona christiani, is a typical Mauvelet species. In Mauvelet cave live 35 new species, half of them terrestrial, half aquatic.
The new species found at Mauvillé are mainly large invertebrates, like this leech, which owes its survival to the proliferation of the micro-inhabitants of the biofilm. Christian is sure he will be able to identify still more new microscopic species in this loam of life. Few scientists have had the chance to observe the living biofilm. Although these microorganisms are particularly resistant within their own space, they become very fragile once outside their natural environment and die quickly beneath a microscope lens. That's what has happened to this Icarian. Its death is good news for these worms and this red protozoa, which are usually on its menu. 10 times thinner than a hair, the Icarian is all the same a giant predator in the microzoo of the biofilm. This protozoa is twisting strangely between the algae and the worms. It is trying to catch, thanks to its lashes, a maximum number of bacteria and fungi, a little like a whale tries to catch plankton. This minuscule protozoa does the same as does this gigantic nematode worm. In a teaspoon full of biofilm, more than 30,000 nematode worms are swimming, and that population can double in the space of 2 days. This should rapidly become invasive. However, its expansion seems to be limited. Christian asked himself what could be the cause of this limit for a long time, until he managed to record this sequence of predation. The young nematode worms are swallowed by this small copepod. The copepod is devoured by this little prawn, who is then eaten by this leech. Thus is the chain of life in Mauvillé. This ecosystem is so unusual that its discovery has made the front cover of many international magazines.
Mauvillé is so famous and inspired a lot of Hollywood stories, but there are this kind of Dracula-style stories where the bacteria were replaced with vampires.
The invertebrates are the only monsters of the lost world of Mauvillé. Do other caves exist in the world which are as inhospitable and peopled by such large creatures? The answer is to be found in Mexico, in another little underground microbe paradise. To find this Eden, hard to lose your way, just follow the little stream which is white to the point of being almost opaque, where all the same a rather curious fish lives.
We're about 1 kilometer away and you can already smell the sulfur from the cave. It smells like rotten eggs. Welcome to paradise.
Dr. Michael Tobler has been studying the extremophile fish from the Villa Luz cave for 10 years. It's also widely known as the Cueva de las Sardinas, or the Sardine Cave. The singular thing about the river is that it has a very high concentration of hydrogen sulfate, which comes from the geysers in this cave. The sulfur springs deposit high doses of sulfur on the wall of the cave. The sulfur is eaten by minuscule acidophile bacteria, which accumulate by their billions in the form of mucus stalactites called snotites. The cave has a kind of cold.
The Cueva de las Uvas here is very similar as the Movile cave in Romania in that it is very toxic, but unlike the Movile cave, the cave here is not a closed system. Nonetheless, all organisms that live here need to have special adaptations to deal with the toxicity of the cave. Some bacteria use chemosynthesis to produce organic matter. It's a process very similar to plants on land, whereas plants use sunlight and carbon dioxide to produce organic matter.
At the cave mouth, the air can be breathed. And many insects seem to feed here from the organic material that springs from the microbial carpet of the cave. This is where the spiders await with webs woven between the sticky stalactites. Unlike what can be seen at Movile, these spider species have eyes. Some have even 8 or 6 or 4, because here they don't have a lot of light to play with.
Here we're actually in one of the front chambers of the cave, and you can see there's about 25 holes in the ceiling. These are called skylights. As we go deeper, there will be more hydrogen sulfide in the air, which is toxic, and that's why we're going to put on our gas mask. The bats living in here, it's not quite clear how they can survive in the cave. Some people think that survival for the bats is only possible because they live closely to the skylights that permit some fresh air to come into the cave. But there's also parts in the cave that do not have skylights, and nonetheless the bats are thriving in there.
The toxic gases drop because they are heavier than air. Michael Tobler thinks that the bats usually stay above this layer and only make brief incursions to capture insects. Their survival means they must not stay too long in the critical zone. The atmosphere of the cave means that animal bodies do not decompose. They remain stuck to the slippery, toxic-coated walls, mummified. As Michael Tobler and his assistant descend further and further into the depths, their legs seem to get heavier. Hydrogen sulfate is now at a critical level for life.
These here are snotties. At the tip, there's a drop of sulfuric acid. That's the byproduct of the bacteria's metabolism.
If the scientists don't protect their skin, they might be severely burned, because these drops are as acid as car battery acid. Michael Tobler will make an incredible discovery. On the snotites are living some nematode worms. This must be one of the reasons they attract so many insects. These little drops of acid, in falling, dissolve limestone and gypsum. This is why that strange blue-white color is found in the water of the stream.
So this is one of the sulfidic springs. This is where all sulfur in the cave originates, and this is basically where the food web starts.
In the entrails of the cave, the air has become completely unbreathable. The oxygen content is 4 times less than that of the air we breathe. However, creatures have made this their home.
So this is the most toxic part of the cave, and it's crazy. In this part of the cave, we actually find fish.
But how do they feed themselves?
These are the adults of the midgets. They live all over the cave in the sediment. And they're basically like the krill in the ocean. They eat the bacteria, the primary producer, and then themselves they are the prey items for most other organisms in the cave.
The blood of the fly larvae is rich in oxygen thanks to the hemoglobin which gives it this red color. This diptera make up an abundant food source for the extremophile fish, Astyanax fasciatus. Michael Tobler will even find hundreds of fish in a sulfur spring. But if they can eat things, how do they breathe?
The fish here within the cave also have adaptations that allows them to cope with the toxicity of the hydrogen sulfide. For example, they rely on a behavior that is called aquatic surface respiration, where the fish breathe in the uppermost level of water, which is the most oxygen-rich part. To facilitate that, they also have enlarged gills, and they have physiological adaptations that allows them to detoxify hydrogen sulfide within the body. Cavefish also have more elaborate non-visual senses. For example, the lateral line system, which allows the fish to sense vibration within the water, is much more elaborate in cavefish than in surface fish. So they can feel their way in darkness much better than a fish from the surface. Here you can see a cavefish right next to a surface fish. As you can see, the two fish differ in their eye size, whereas the cavefish have much smaller eyes than the surface fish. The two fish also differ in their coloration, and the cavefish is much paler than the surface fish.
For the first time, Michael Tobler is going to experiment to see if the surface Astyanax fasciatus can live in the hell of the cave, and if the cave fish can survive on the surface in the stream.
The fish from sulfidic water actually will die if we rapidly transfer them into normal water without sulfide and high oxygen. However, if we acclimatize the fish slowly to the freshwater conditions, they are perfectly able to survive. The opposite, however, is not true. If we take a fish from regular fresh water and we slowly try to acclimatize it to the sulfidic condition, it will die nonetheless. That is because these fish lack the adaptations to deal with the toxic effects of this substance.
But their adaptation to surface breathing makes these fish easy prey for the giant water bug called Belostoma.
The cavefish are adapted to get oxygen at the water surface, but it's exactly where the Belostoma are waiting for the cavefish and are actually attacking them and eating them, as you can see here. It's very unusual that a bug is actually the main predator of a fish within an ecosystem. In other places on Earth, insects may prey on vertebrates occasionally, but it's unique to this system that the bug is the main predator.
Its bite is considered to be one of the most venomous and painful that an insect can deliver. It injects saliva that liquefies muscle tissue, then it sucks out the content.
The bugs mainly eat big fish and male fish, but we don't think it's an active choice by the bug. We think that big fish and males have higher oxygen requirement. So they will be spending more time at the water surface breathing. They are exposing themselves to the predator more often than smaller fish and females do.
It's a blessing for the water bug that the fish come to the surface, because unlike the Lake Natron, the bug doesn't have a long tube to be able to stay hidden for a long time below the surface of the water. The fact that it stays mainly on the surface is an advantage for protecting its eggs from eventual predators. It's the male that makes sure that they're protected by carrying them on its back. As they grow, the young bugs change their skin. Their old skin feeds the red flatworm. It's the garbage collector of this ecosystem. Armed with a giant digestive tract, it collects all the waste. There remain many enigmas in Villa-Luz, but for the descendants of the Zocs, the inhabitants of the region, this stream and this cave are sacred. For generations, the Zocs have repeated the same gestures and the same rituals just before the Easter festival. Used for fishing, these barbasco roots are highly toxic. When food became scarce, the old inhabitants used to harvest the fish, which were abundant in the cave. It was the gift of the shadows before becoming the gift of God.
In the name of the gods and of our mother, the earth, in the name of the sun and the moon, allow us to enter the cave to seek our food.
The fishing is done in the first part of the cave, according to the same ritual, by candlelight.
We bless here the 4 cardinal points: east, north, south, and west, to purify the air that some of us consider highly contaminated.
The root mixture dissolves in the water, asphyxiates the fish, and kills them.
Japanese scientists came to tell the town officials that we shouldn't go into the cave anymore because there were 6 different kinds of gas, like oxygen, carbon monoxide, and sulfur, and that it was dangerous for us.
For the Zocs, it's a blessed place which is swarming with fish. It's just a matter of filling the baskets, and once the fish is dried, it loses its sulfurous taste. But do they know that they owe this miraculous catch to a unique ecosystem which all begins with this pile of extremophile bacteria? In some New Zealand caves, strange threads hang by their thousands. But here, they aren't accumulations of bacteria like in the Villa-Luz cave. Dr. Ian Stringer has been studying them for many years.
Look at that, Corin, just like stars, everywhere. But that's a dangerous light trap.
These traps are in a sense fishing lines for the cave-dwelling glowworms.
Glowworms are not an extremophile, but using light to attract insects is a good strategy for caves because there's not very much food in there, and they get the insects that hatch from water that's drawn into the cave through the rivers.
All the glowworm has to do is to move up to its prey, trapped on the silken thread.
Here's a mayfly that's just been caught, still alive. And look at all the larvae around here. They're, 3 or 4 centimetres long. There's more food there, more food.
The glowworm isn't really a worm, but actually a fly larva. This larva has only one aim: to eat as much as possible to get the protein necessary to change into a nymph.
This is a female pupa. They sometimes glow. They take 12 to 15 days before they hatch into a little fly.
Very often, this little fly gets caught in its own trap.
In the cave, you can get up to 100 glowworms per square metre. They separate out and they keep a little space around each other because they're cannibals and they'll eat each other if they get too close.
Each glowworm has therefore its own territory. For a long time, the way these silk thread traps worked was a mystery. Collecting them was already a particularly delicate task because they are very sticky.
These are the droplets of glue on the fishing line, a bit like a spider's web.
These shining droplets are in fact balls of glue. Often, the spiders in the cave share the same zones as the glowworm. They make use of the light of the worms to catch their own prey. In exchange, the spiders protect the glowworms. Sometimes the threads of silk get mixed up, and the glowworm finishes up in the spider's larder. The glowworm's light reflects all the way down the silk thread. It's caused by a chemical reaction made by the contact of the waste it expels with oxygen.
Here is the head of the larva. This is its gut. And here at the other end is the light organ with a bright white reflector on top. The organ of glowworms that produces the cold light are excretory organs. There's 4 of them. They run from the gut to the end of the insect, and it's the blind ends that produce the light, 4 of them. They have a big reflector on top to make the light shine downwards.
This curious cricket, the weta, lives in the glowworm caves of New Zealand. Unfortunately for the weta, it has no other way of attracting its prey.
could be the only insect in the world that lives and breeds inside the cave but has to come out at night to feed. Cave weta typically avoid any kind of light. They won't even come out of the cave if the moon is too bright.
This night, Lorraine is in luck. The wetas are out despite the veiled moon and the rain. Thanks to an infrared system, the insects are visible, and the wetas can be seen feeding on vegetation and dead insects. They are the only species of cave-dwelling insect to have adopted this original system. There are a lot of weta caves, but they're often very difficult to reach. Lorraine Cook is used to this. It's her job to count the populations because the species is becoming more and more rare.
This is a good weta cave. There's all these weta droppings here. Lots of it. It's dark and cold and damp. Oh, and here's some up here. And there's a lot more down here, all on the wall here. And up on the roof. Yes, I'd like to catch one of these. Oh, I've got two. Have developed these great big long legs and really long antennae which they wave around in the cave to find out where they are because they can't see anything. They also have these really long mouth parts that they use to feel what's in front of them. These cave weta here are quite big, especially this adult male here, but they can actually grow a lot bigger than this. Some of these cave weta have been recorded at 45 centimetres long, and that's from the tip of their antennae to the back of their hind leg. That's huge. So in fact, cave wetas are one of the largest insects in the world.
These wetas spend most of their time totally immobile and in peace, but they do sometimes become aggressive.
This male cave weta here looks like it's got something wrong with its leg, perhaps it's broken. Male cave weta are known to fight sometimes. It's thought it's over competition for mates, but this cave weta will survive quite happily without this leg if it falls off, because cave weta are also known to eat their own legs when they get hungry and there's nothing else to eat. The cave weta is like a prehistoric insect, which means it's relatively unchanged for millions and millions of years. It looks exactly the same now as it did millions of years ago.
At the time of the dinosaurs, its distant ancestors lived outside, like the forest weta, that can still be spotted if you have good eyes, camouflaged in thorny trees.
Oh, he's angry.
The giant weta is much bigger than the forest weta. It's the size of a human hand and weighs more than a small bird. This weta doesn't need to take refuge in the caves to find warmth because it's a real cold extremophile. It can, in effect, freeze and unfreeze over 6 months, as these images show. This mysterious ability to resist the frost, which usually destroys cells in most kinds of animals, is presently being studied. Like the wetters, the spiders, and the glowworms, or the fish, a curious amphibian has found refuge in the caves of Central Europe.
Before this animal was scientifically described, the local people knew for this animal because some springs were bringing it out of the caves, and they thought it was the baby of the dragon.
Professor Boris Sket is one of the leading Proteus specialists. To observe it, he scours the most impressive karstic caves of Slovenia with his team. These mysterious creatures only live in these limestone caves and in some others found in neighboring countries, but nowhere else in the world.
So we will search here for Proteus, Stanislav.
Yes.
Okay. You see?
Oh, yes.
You see it there?
Right.
So. We can say that in some sense Proteus is an extremophile. It's able to support lack of food. It can live for months without any food, maybe even for many years. Of course, it will use its tissues, it will survive.
Its secret is to be found in this immense organ, its liver, where it stores food in the form of lipids and glycogen, a kind of superfuel. It reduces its activity to function in slow-down mode. This isn't hibernation because it can take up normal fast activity almost immediately. In order to feed, it is capable of detecting very small amounts of organic composants. Its inner ear allows it to perceive sound waves. To breathe, the Proteus has outsized external gills situated behind its head. Their red color is due to the presence of blood enriched with oxygen. It can go for up to a quarter of an hour without air.
Everything what is not necessary is being reduced to economize the use of this scarce food. And maybe also it doesn't need 5 fingers. This is a case of reduction. Like the eyes got reduced, like pigmentation got reduced.
All these adaptations, these strategies, have allowed life to grow in extreme conditions. The species we have seen practice amongst themselves permanent exchanges. A remarkable balance, very fragile and often unimaginable, comes from that.
That cave is dark, is hot, is sulfidic acid. It's not a hell because the creatures have an unlimited source of food.
The fish in this system are at the very initial stage of speciation.